Last night something changed. Not in a loud way, not with drama, not with a big scene that everyone saw coming. It changed in the quiet space between one breath and the next when your person stopped talking, looked down, and realized they could not keep carrying the same hidden truth in silence. Out of nowhere, the mood in that room shifted. Their friends felt it. The pause, the tension. The look on their face that said a buried feeling was suddenly too heavy to hold anymore. And if you stay with me, you are going to understand why that moment mattered so much. Because what they finally admitted was not small and it was not random. This had been building for a long time, longer than anyone around them knew, longer than even they wanted to admit. So do not skip this part, because the truth that came out last night did not just surprise their friends. It changed something inside them too. And by the end of this, you may understand why their silence was never emptiness at all. It was fear, it was delay, it was a heart trying to hide from what it already knew. The room had been normal just seconds before. People talking, light laughter, half-serious stories, the usual noise that fills a space when no one expects anything important to happen. Then your person went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from boredom, a different quiet, heavy, noticeable. One friend saw it first and asked what was wrong, but your person did not answer right away. They just sat there holding on to a thought they had pushed down too many times before. Even the air felt different. It was like everything slowed down around them because inside something was fighting hard between staying safe and finally being honest. They had spent so long acting fine, acting unaffected, acting like your name no longer had weight in their chest, acting like your memory did not still return in moments when no one was watching. But last night, the act started to break, and then, with a lower voice than anyone expected, they finally said it. "I am finally ready to admit this." That sentence alone changed the whole room. Everyone knew immediately that what was coming next was something they had tried to hide, maybe even from themselves. Stay here, because once those words were spoken, nothing about that conversation stayed casual again. The truth had started moving, and it was not going back into silence. They leaned back after saying it, almost like they needed a second just to hear their own honesty out loud. For a brief moment, it looked like they might stop there, but they did not. They exhaled slowly and said that every distraction had failed. Every attempt to move on had somehow brought them back to the same unfinished place. They admitted that they had tried to fill their mind with other things, other people, other conversations, but none of it lasted the way they expected. Sooner or later, the same memory returned. The same energy. The same feeling. Your presence. Your absence. The sound of certain words you once said. The meaning of moments they once tried to call ordinary. One of their closest friends looked stunned because this was the first time your person had spoken without hiding behind half-truths. Until then, they had always sounded sure of themselves, always looked in control, always had some clean answer ready, but last night there was no performance left. They admitted that some nights had grown longer because old thoughts kept showing up uninvited. They said certain moments had returned in exact detail, even moments they truly believed were gone. And that was the part that unsettled them most, because people do not remember with that kind of sharpness unless something still matters. Do not skip, because what they said next made the whole room even quieter than before. Then one friend asked the question that pushed everything deeper. Why are you saying it now? Why tonight? Why after all this time? Your person paused before answering because the truth was not simple, but when it came clearly. They said something had shifted recently. Silence no longer felt safe. Pretending had become more exhausting than honesty. Carrying it quietly had started to feel heavier than speaking it out loud. They explained that lately your memory had been showing up in ordinary moments without warning, during simple hours, during quiet evenings, in conversations that had nothing to do with you. And every time it happened, it brought the same uncomfortable realization. What they had buried was still alive. One friend tried to speak, but your person kept going, almost like they knew if they stopped, courage might leave the room before they finished. They admitted that they had watched other people move through life with ease while they stayed emotionally unfinished inside. They admitted there was a part of them still tied to something unresolved, something they had never fully named until that night. And then came the sentence that changed the mood again. They said they were afraid that by the time they finally understood what was true, the moment to say it might already be gone. That was when everyone stopped seeing this as a simple confession. It had become regret. Real regret. The kind that speaks only when something precious still lives in the heart. One friend asked if they had ever truly let go. This time, the answer came fast. No. No hesitation, no hiding, just one honest word. And somehow that one word said more than all their past silence. They admitted they had hidden behind distance because saying they still cared felt risky. They thought if they stayed quiet long enough, the feeling would weaken on its own. But instead of fading, it became sharper. They remembered conversations they never expected to remember. Small details nobody else would think mattered. Certain expressions. Certain pauses. The way a few moments stayed bright while so many other memories disappeared. And that is what shook them, because it proved that some connections leave marks deeper than pride can erase. Then they admitted something else. There had been times they almost reached out, times they opened a message and stared at it, times they nearly broke their own silence but stopped before sending a single word. Their friends looked at each other because now it was obvious this had never been as finished as your person pretended. Still, even after saying all of that, they went quiet again. It felt like there was one deeper truth sitting underneath everything, waiting to be spoken. And finally, they said it. They were no longer sure whether hiding their feelings had protected them or cost them something important. That sentence stayed in the room like a weight no one could ignore. Because once a person reaches that thought, inner change has already begun. After that, the energy in the room changed in a more serious way. One friend asked softly, "If you had the chance right now, what would you say?" Your person looked away for a second, gave a small smile that carried both hope and sadness, and answered with more honesty than anyone expected. "I would say the truth should have been spoken earlier." Then silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This silence meant everyone understood a hidden door inside them had opened. And what came after that was even more surprising, because instead of pulling back, they kept talking. They admitted that for a long time they tried to explain their feelings in logical ways, as if emotions could be made simple by neat reasoning. But nothing they told themselves ever matched what was really happening inside. The real truth was harder and simpler at the same time. No matter how much they tried to move forward in their mind, something inside kept returning to the same unfinished place. One friend leaned in and asked if the feeling had grown stronger recently. Your person took a breath, paused, and then nodded. That small movement said everything. This was not some passing thought. It was something that had been quietly building for much longer than anyone knew. Stay with this, because the next part revealed that even they were shocked by how much was still living inside them. They said there had been nights when old details came back with strange clarity. Words, expressions, simple moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now felt impossible to forget. It surprised them because they had not gone looking for those memories. The memories arrived on their own, almost as if something inside refused to let the connection disappear completely. Then another friend asked whether they had ever truly told themselves it was over. Your person gave a faint smile, the kind people give when they know they have been lying to themselves for a long time. "Yes," they said. Many times. They told themselves it was done. They told themselves enough time had passed. They told themselves silence meant closure. But every time they believed that story, something small would happen and break the illusion. A thought, a reminder, a random feeling they could not explain. And suddenly everything they claimed was finished felt unfinished all over again. Then came a confession that changed the conversation in an even deeper way. They said they had met people, spoken with others, filled time with noise and motion, but none of it carried the same quiet impact. One friend finally asked what everyone was already thinking. "Are you saying you never stopped feeling something?" And your person answered in a voice so soft it made the truth even stronger. "Maybe I stopped saying it, but I never stopped carrying it." That line landed hard, too honest to ignore, too real to explain away. A quiet friend who had barely spoken until then finally asked why they had hidden this for so long if the feeling never fully left. The answer came slower this time, as if each word had to be pulled from somewhere deep and guarded. They said sometimes people hide the truth because saying it out loud makes it real. And once it becomes real, you have to face what you delayed, what you misunderstood, and what you may have almost lost by staying silent too long. That answer silenced the whole room again. No one heard it as casual. They heard it for what it was, a confession from a place they had avoided for a very long time. Then your person admitted something else. There had been recent moments when they almost chose honesty, almost reached out, almost broke the silence. But every time they stopped because they did not know if the timing still belonged to them. That fear had been stronger than they wanted anyone to know. They said the hardest part was realizing that feelings can stay quiet without disappearing. They do not always shout. Sometimes they wait in the background for the night when hiding them becomes more painful than admitting them. And that was what last night had become. One friend asked if they still believed the feeling mattered. Your person did not even hesitate. If it did not matter, I would not still be thinking about what should have been said. That sentence echoed through the room because regret only speaks that clearly when something valuable still exists in the heart. Then their voice changed again, softer but steadier. They admitted there was one thing they had never told anyone, not even their closest friends. There were times they imagined what would happen if honesty came too late. Times they wondered if silence had already changed more than they realized. Times they questioned whether missing the right moment had become the one thing they could not fix. For the first time, their friends saw them without defense. No clever wording, no controlled image, just sincerity. One friend asked carefully, "What if you still had a chance?" Your person looked down, took a long breath, and said they would not waste another moment pretending they had nothing left to admit. That sentence changed everything because now the conversation was no longer only about the past. It was also about possibility, about what could still happen if courage finally stayed longer than fear. And after saying that, something opened even more. A friend asked what had made them admit it that night after hiding it for so long. Your person said something small had happened earlier that day, nothing dramatic, no big event, just one quiet reminder that came out of nowhere and brought everything back at once. That was the moment they realized they had not moved on as completely as they kept pretending. Because when one ordinary second can still shift your entire mood, the feeling underneath it was never as gone as you claimed. Their friends listened differently after that, more carefully, more deeply. One of them asked, "Have you been carrying this every day?" Your person answered in a way no one expected. "Not every day," they said, "but often enough that I can no longer call it accidental." And that answer made the room completely still. Because there is a difference between remembering someone once in a while and realizing they still return to your thoughts enough to shape your inner life. Then your person confessed there had been moments when they were laughing with other people while part of their mind drifted somewhere else. Moments when conversations continued around them, but inside they were comparing energies, comparing feelings, comparing what felt real and what felt empty. They said that comparison always led back to one place they had never fully closed. They admitted there were nights when they almost spoke the full truth to themselves, but stopped because honesty would force them to accept that distance had never truly changed what remained inside. Then one friend asked the direct question no one had wanted to say too soon. "Are you afraid of what this means?" And this time your person answered immediately, "Yes, because once I admit this fully, I cannot pretend anymore." That was the moment everyone understood that silence had not been peace. It had been protection. Distance had not been closure. It had been delay. And now both were starting to break. They went even deeper after that. They said they had heard many opinions from other people over time. Advice on what they should do. Advice on who they should forget. Advice on how life moves on and how people should not hold on too long. But none of that advice ever reached the part of them that still felt emotionally unfinished. Because advice may guide choices, but it cannot erase what remains alive inside the heart. One friend leaned forward and asked a question that cut straight to the center. If everything became fully honest right now, what would be hardest to admit? Your person did not pause. They said the hardest truth was realizing they had spent too long acting unaffected while secretly hoping clarity would arrive on its own. But clarity did not arrive quietly. It arrived that night. It arrived in that room. It arrived when they finally heard their own voice say what they had avoided for so long. A quiet friend then added, "Maybe what you feel has been real much longer than you let yourself admit." No one interrupted after that because the truth felt visible to everyone now, and your person did not deny it. Instead, they gave a slow breath and admitted something even more powerful. "Maybe I knew before tonight. I just did not want to hear myself say it." That sentence hit with incredible force because hearing truth in your own voice changes everything. It turns a feeling into a fact you can no longer run from. Before the conversation ended, your person said that if life gave them one honest moment again, they would choose different words than before. Not guarded words, not delayed words, different words. And everyone there understood that this was no longer just reflection. It was the beginning of inner change, but the night still was not finished. After everything they had already said, their friends thought the deepest truth had been spoken. They were wrong. The room grew quiet again, not in discomfort, but in that heavy way that means one more important sentence is still waiting. Your person looked like someone listening to thoughts they had avoided for months, maybe longer. One friend finally asked if there was still something else they had not said. Your person admitted that the hardest part was not realizing what they felt. The hardest part was realizing how long they had delayed accepting that those feelings still had power. They said there had been many chances to be honest with themselves, but every time they chose distraction, delay, or silence because honesty would have forced them to face how much one person still mattered. That was when everyone understood this was not sudden emotion. This had been building quietly under ordinary days, under routines, under jokes, under conversations, even under the appearance of moving on. The truth had been there all along. Last night, it simply stopped hiding. One friend asked if they thought you would be surprised if you knew all of this. Your person looked down and answered with a kind of honesty that no longer had any shield around it. Yes, because I never let them see how much stayed with me. That answer carried regret all by itself. They explained that many people think silence protects dignity, but silence can also bury feelings so deeply that even the person carrying them starts pretending those feelings no longer exist. And that is exactly what happened to them. They also admitted there were ordinary moments that suddenly felt heavier than they should have, hearing something familiar, passing through a place that stirred memory, catching a small reminder and feeling their whole mood shift. Those moments kept proving the same thing. Certain connections do not disappear just because life keeps moving. Then a friend asked again, "So why now? Why tonight?" And your person answered without delay, "Because tonight I got tired of listening to my own thoughts and pretending they meant nothing." That line changed the entire room, because honesty often begins at the exact point where pretending becomes exhausting. They admitted that if someone had asked them a month ago, they would have denied everything. A week ago, they would have changed the subject. Even that morning, they might have laughed it off, but something inside had shifted, and once it shifted, the truth became impossible to hold back. That is when the conversation stopped being about memory and became about readiness. Then came one of the strongest moments of the night. A friend asked, "If that person were standing here right now, what would you finally admit?" The room went still. Your person took a breath and answered in a voice that sounded softer than before, but more certain. They said they would admit that some people leave an impression time cannot easily replace. They would admit that distance taught them many things, but it did not erase what remained meaningful. They would admit that some unfinished feelings only become clear after enough silence has passed. And most of all, they would admit that pretending to be unaffected had become harder than speaking honestly. Then, before anyone could respond, they quietly added one more truth. "I think I waited too long to stop pretending I had already accepted everything." That sentence carried more emotion than almost anything else they had said, because people only speak that way when they finally understand what silence has cost them. And just when everyone thought the night had reached its end, they said one final thing that nobody in that room was ready to hear. They admitted that what unsettled them most was not the feeling itself. It was realizing how many times they had mistaken silence for closure when silence had really only delayed clarity. That was the moment everyone knew this was not a passing emotion. It was something that had survived every attempt to disappear. One last question came before the night closed. If you had one chance to send only one honest sentence, what would it be? Your person did not take long to answer, and maybe that is what made it even more powerful. The sentence was already there, waiting. They said they would tell you that some truths become impossible to hide once you realize they never stopped mattering. After that, no one spoke. No one needed to. The room understood. Their friends understood. And maybe for the first time your person understood too. They had not been running from a small feeling. They had been running from a truth that stayed alive through time, distance, pride, and silence. And before standing up, before the room slowly returned to ordinary voices, they said one last quiet line that stayed hanging in the air long after the conversation ended. I think the hardest part was pretending I had already accepted what my heart was still trying to understand, and that was it, not a dramatic ending, not a loud confession, just one honest sentence after too much silence. But sometimes that is how the deepest truths arrive, quietly, slowly, then all at once. So if you have been wondering whether they still feel it, whether your name still moves through their mind, whether their silence meant nothing, listen closely to what last night revealed. Silence was never the end of the feeling. It was only the place where the feeling hid until they were finally ready to tell the truth.